Fall break came around in October. So we got there in August, and in October, fall break came around and the dorm room cleared out. And so 900 students went down to maybe 10. I mean, no one was there. Craig was gone, and I was there by myself. And it was the first time that I had been just alone in a long time. So basically we were, 900 students cleared out. There were maybe 10 left. And I was in the dorm room by myself. And it was the first time I had been alone in a long, long time. So I started thinking about things, and I started feeling bad about things and sins that I had committed. And I felt depressed, and I felt down, and I felt hopeless. Those would be probably the three words. And so I had a Bible there that I had brought up with me that someone from our youth pastor or somebody had given to me, and it was there. And I remember at one point opening it up and just kind of flipping to not a passage, but one of the commentaries that they put in the middle there that's not part of the Bible, but it's just somebody writing about hope. And I remember reading that. But before that was up on the rooftop. But before that, I'm sitting in the dorm room by myself and feeling down and I aware of sin that I had committed that was wrong. And I looked out the window, and I was listening to Hootie and the Blowfish, number 11 on their first CD. Nobody's listening to me, not even the trees, something like that. And it was going on and on. And I was thinking, is anybody out there? And I looked out the window, and I said, God, I don't even know if you exist. But if you're here, I need help. Do something now. Please do something right now. And I heard a swoosh come under my door. Something had flown under my door, and I thought it was a Papa John's flyer. So right when I prayed that, something came to my foot. So I said, God, I don't know if you exist. If you're out there, please do something. And then something comes to my foot. So I lean over and I pick it up. I think it's a Papa John's flyer, and I look at it, and it says victory in life through Jesus Christ. Reason to believe, something like that. Come hear this guy, Rice Brooks, who lives in Nashville, speak about Christianity. And I look at it and I'm like, that's weird. I just prayed that. And so I thought I need to go to this meeting. And I picked up the phone and called Jenny, who became my wife. We've been married for 23 years now, and she was a friend. We had just met on campus, and but I was drawn to her. We weren't dating or anything like that, but we were in the same friend group, and I just felt close to her. She grew up in Indiana. When we first met, we hit it off really well because we just had so many common interests. And I remember thinking when I first met her, because a mutual friend introduced us, and I thought, I'm going to marry her. I remember having that thought. And she said later on that she thought, I'd like to marry a guy like that.
She didn't say you guys.
Yeah, not me, yeah. So fast forward the day that I'm there, I picked up the phone to call Jenny and say, hey, I want to go to this event. Will you come with me? It's on Thursday night. Yeah, and I think the flyer must have come to my door on a Wednesday, so I think it was the following night that we were going to go. And so then I called Jenny that night and said, I just feel like I need to go by myself. And she said, okay. So I went, and when I got there, and so basically I went there, and in the room it said at the front, Volunteers for Christ. The Tennessee Volunteers, and Volunteers for Christ ended up being the largest campus ministry. It's affiliated with Cornerstone Church of Knoxville, the church that we ended up going to for 18 years. And VFC, Volunteers for Christ, was just like Campus Crusade or Cru or RUF or Baptist Student Union. I went into that, and there were maybe 50 people in the room, and it says Volunteers for Christ. And I remember sitting there going, okay, let's see what these guys have to say. And I'm looking around, sizing everybody up in the room, thinking, I will be leading here very shortly. Just give me a couple minutes. And and I'll be a leader in this, place. And I was real proud. And I saw someone from high school there, and we talked for a minute. And this guy gets up and he starts to preach, and it's Rice Brooks, and he's got on cowboy boots and kind of the Nashville look of button up. That people still do this, the button up shirt with the sports coat. And I just remember thinking, that guy's kind of cool. He looks cool. And he started talking. There's something bold about him. He's just a real bold guy. And I remember thinking, I'm listening to what he was funny. And I just was listening to him thinking, I like this guy. But then he started talking about John 3. And he was talking about, you must be born again to see the kingdom of heaven. And how Jesus had talked to Nicodemus about being born again. And Nicodemus, a Pharisee and religious person, had said, well, how are you born again? You go back into your mother's womb? I don't understand this. And they have this whole dialogue about it. And Rice Brooks was presenting the gospel and saying through that, that you can be a religious person and not be right with God. And just like Nicodemus wasn't. And so he said, I remember him saying, you could go to church until going to church doesn't make you a Christian, just like going into McDonald's doesn't make you a hamburger, And then and he had all these different thoughts that I would have a thought, and he would answer my thought, and I had never that was odd to me. That had never happened before ever. But I'm having an internal dialogue with the guy who's speaking. So I literally had this thought because I started thinking he was challenging people about whether or not they were a Christian. So he was saying, in the South, everybody says they're a Christian, but that doesn't mean you're a Christian just because you say you're one. And if anybody had asked me, I would have said I was a Christian because I went to church, a Church of Christ in Chattanooga 3 times a week. Every time the doors were open, twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday. But I wasn't a Christian, and I didn't know I wasn't a Christian, which is very bad, scary place to be if you think you are and you're not. And so he was challenging people who think they are and they're not, and I was one of them. And so he said, I remember when he got to that part, I remember thinking, well, I know I'm a Christian because I've been baptized. And so then he's giving this talk, and he stops, and he said, some of you just thought, I know I'm a Christian because I've been baptized. And don't think that being dunked in the water makes you right with God. You can know the fish by their first name and not be right with God. And so I thought, oh gosh. So he shot that down, and then I remember thinking, well, I'm a leader in the youth group. And later on he said, don't think, I'm a leader in the youth group. I'm fine, right with God. And so that happened 3 times where I would have a thought and he would answer it. And eventually I realized I'm not a Christian. So I was sitting in there at 18 years old, and for the first time in my life, I had been baptized. But for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't a Christian. And so I remember thinking, he kept preaching, and I was thinking, I'm not a Christian. And then I thought, I'm not a Christian? I've gone to church my whole life. And then I thought, I'm not a Christian, and then those words kept going through my head, and then I thought, oh no, I knew enough of the Bible and right and wrong to know that you have to be a Christian to go to heaven. And so then I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. And so right around that time, he started giving sort of the answer and talked about Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection, and how you can only come to the Father through the Son. And the only way that you can be right with God is by putting your faith and trust in the finished work of Christ and what he did on the cross for us. And as he talked about it, it became simple. It was a simple message. Just believe what he did repent of your sins and trust in this good news. And I became a Christian. Like in my seat, they did an altar call and had people come down, but I believe, later on that it was funny. A lot of people responded that night, and that was typical when he would do those things. Very fruitful ministry, I think, and so he would But later on, I found that out. But anyway, he said if anybody wants to be prayed for, come down. A lot of people went forward, and everybody was being ministered to except for me. I went down there, and I was like the last, person. So the guy that ran the meeting came up to me and said, "Hey, champ, what's going on in your mind?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I just believe what he said, and I believe it, And so he said, "Well, can I follow up with you tomorrow? What's your dorm room? Can I come by it and talk with you?" And I said, "Yeah, and I've got a twin brother. He needs to hear this too." And so he came by the dorm room, and Craig, and I was in the study hall, and Craig answered the door. So my twin brother answered it, and Bruce Landis saw him, and he said, "You look like the guy that was there last night, but you're not him, I don't think, because you would know me. You must be Craig." And he said, "Yeah, who are you?" And, Craig's at that time not a Christian. And he comes into the other room and said, "Hey, there's a guy in here that wants to talk with you. What meeting did you go to last night?" He kind of asked with like a bite. And I said, "Well, it's this campus ministry, and I can't remember if I said you should come or I just answered his question. Bruce, I think, invited him. And he ended up coming, and I said, "Hey, you can sit with me." I went the next night too. And he said, "I don't want to sit with you." So he sat up in the back. I sat down here, and I just remember I didn't know how to pray at the time, and I just kept going, "God, please, God, please, God, please." And then, they did the altar call, and Craig threw his chair back, and came down. And I was like, "Oh, wow." And I didn't even know all of what was going on at the time, but he got saved. So I became a Christian. He became a Christian. And then we just started getting discipled by this group, this Volunteers for Christ. And I remember that was maybe Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, or maybe Thursday, Friday night. So Bruce is talking to us, and Bruce Landis says, "Well, hey guys, if you're following Christ, one of the things he wants you to do is come to church. So, get up on Sunday morning and come to our church." And then so we said yes. And then he said, the early Christians were all about serving, and we really need people to serve. So he said, if y'all can show up at 6 a.m, and we do this thing called setup, because our church was meeting in a high school at the time, and we had the church office. And so we would go pick up all the stuff, put it in a U-Haul or a truck, and take it over, and then deliver it. And then once we had our service, we'd take it all back. So I think, maybe it was a Wednesday, Thursday night, or Thursday, Friday night. We became Christians on Sunday, 6 a.m. We're there setting up chairs, and it was kind of like a church plant. It was a young church. I'm so thankful he was bold enough to ask us to do that. So we ended up doing that for years. It felt like a long time. We did it for a long time, and so I just kind of immersed. It was like being dunked in a pool of water of my free time became Volunteers for Christ, Cornerstone Church.